Last week, inside a meeting room in Washington, D.C., the governor of the UAE Central Bank sat across from the United States Treasury Secretary and delivered what the Wall Street Journal described as an implicit threat against the dollar's dominant position in global oil trade. Not from Beijing, not from Moscow, not from Tehran, from Abu Dhabi, from one of America's closest Gulf allies, from a country that hosts American military bases, that pegs its currency to the US dollar, that holds $270 billion in foreign reserves, the majority in dollar-denominated assets. Khalid Mohammed Balama, governor of the UAE Central Bank, told Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent that if the economic fallout from the Iran war continues to escalate, the UAE may need a financial lifeline to prevent a dollar liquidity crunch. And if that lifeline does not come from Washington, Abu Dhabi might be forced to use Chinese yuan for oil transactions instead. The Wall Street Journal published this on Sunday. It is the most significant financial signal to come out of the Iran war so far. Not because it will happen tomorrow, because of what it reveals about the structural shift already underway beneath the surface of an arrangement that has governed global finance for 50 years. I want to walk you through this today using game theory, structural history, and the incentives that are now driving every actor in this story. Because the petrodollar system, the arrangement that more than any other single mechanism underpins American economic power, is facing a stress test unlike anything it has encountered since Henry Kissinger built it in 1974. The global order is shifting faster than the news cycle can report. Hit subscribe to stay ahead of the curve, because what I am about to show you changes everything. Let me start with what the petrodollar system actually is, because the mainstream coverage of this story assumes everyone understands the mechanism. And if you do not understand the mechanism, you cannot understand why the UAE's message to Bessent is as significant as it is. In 1971, President Nixon ended the convertibility of the US dollar to gold. He killed Bretton Woods, the international monetary system that had governed global finance since the end of World War II. With the gold anchor gone, there was no longer a fundamental reason for the world to hold US dollars. The dollar had value because gold backed it. Without gold, why hold dollars? Kissinger solved this problem with one of the most consequential diplomatic arrangements in modern history. In a series of meetings with the Saudi royal family in 1974, the United States made a deal. America would provide military protection for Saudi oil fields. America would sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. America would guarantee the kingdom's security. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would do two things. First, price all oil sales in US dollars. Second, invest the surplus oil revenues, the petrodollars, back into US Treasury bonds and American financial assets. By 1975, every OPEC member had joined the arrangement. The petrodollar system was operational. The genius of the mechanism is this: because all oil in the world is priced in dollars, every country that needs oil needs dollars first. Japan needs dollars to buy Saudi crude. India needs dollars to buy Iraqi crude. China needs dollars to buy Emirati crude. This creates a permanent, structural, global demand for the US dollar that has nothing to do with America's trade balance, its budget deficit, or its economic performance. The world needs dollars because the world needs oil. And oil is priced in dollars because Saudi Arabia in 1974 agreed that it would be. Keep that arrangement in the back of your mind because we are coming back to it. Now let me walk you through what has changed since February 28th, when the United States launched its military operation against Iran. The first force is the security guarantee breakdown. The petrodollar deal was not just an economic arrangement, it was a security arrangement. America provided military protection. Gulf states provided dollar-denominated oil. The two things were inseparable. The Gulf states accepted the deal because American security guarantees were real. American military presence in the region meant that if someone threatened the Gulf Kingdom, America would respond. The Iran war has revealed a crack in that guarantee that was not visible before. When Iran retaliated against American military operations, it did not primarily target American bases in the region. It targeted Gulf infrastructure. Over 2,800 drones and missiles were fired at the UAE. Bahrain was struck. Qatar's energy facilities were threatened. The Gulf states bore the brunt of Iranian retaliation for a war they did not start, did not vote for, and were not adequately consulted about. The academic who is perhaps closest to the UAE's ruling family put it in public writing on Sunday. Abdul Khalik Abdullah, former advisor to UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed, argued that American military bases in the UAE are not a strategic asset. They are a burden because they make the UAE a target for anyone who wants to strike at America without the compensating benefit that those bases actually protect the UAE when the shooting starts. That is a devastating structural critique. And when it comes from inside the court of the ruler rather than from an opposition figure, it signals something real about how Abu Dhabi's leadership is now thinking about the arrangement. The second force is the yuan infrastructure that already exists. Here is what most of the coverage of the WSJ story is missing. The UAE did not threaten to use yuan in a vacuum. The UAE has been building the technical and financial infrastructure to use yuan in oil trade since March of 2023. That is 3 years ago. In March 2023, the UAE and China completed the first yuan-denominated LNG trade through the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange. Not a test, an actual transaction. 65 tons of liquefied natural gas, paid for in yuan, settled through a Chinese exchange without a single dollar touching the transaction. Since then, Abu Dhabi has established a central bank digital currency platform compatible with yuan-based cross-border payments. It has created currency swap agreements with the People's Bank of China. It has opened a yuan clearing center in Abu Dhabi. It has a framework with China that allows Emirati entities to settle oil transactions in yuan, technically and legally today. China is not the UAE's backup plan. China is the UAE's already operational alternative. The question is not whether the UAE can switch to yuan. The infrastructure exists. The question is whether the UAE's leadership has decided the moment to use that infrastructure has arrived. Now I want to go deeper, because this is where most people's analysis completely breaks down. The third force is what game theory calls the credible threat. And this is the mechanism that makes the Bessent conversation genuinely consequential rather than just diplomatically interesting. In game theory, a threat is only strategically meaningful if the party making it has both the ability and the incentive to carry it out. An empty threat is worse than no threat at all, because it reveals weakness when it is not followed through. A credible threat changes the behavior of the target without requiring the threat to be executed. The most powerful threats in international relations are never the ones that are executed. They are the ones that do not need to be, because the target has already understood the calculation. The UAE's implicit threat to Bessent is credible on both dimensions. The ability is there. The infrastructure exists. The yuan trading mechanisms are operational. The incentive is there. The UAE is absorbing economic damage from a war it did not choose, and its security guarantor has not provided the financial compensation that the original bargain implied. Here is the specific game theory structure that makes this moment unusual. The petrodollar system has always been described as mutually beneficial. America provides security. Gulf states provide dollar-priced oil. Both parties gain. But the war has revealed an asymmetry in the arrangement that the Gulf states did not fully price before. When the security guarantee is tested, its benefits flow primarily to American strategic objectives, not to Gulf state security. The UAE got hit with 2,800 Iranian drones and missiles. America bombed Iran's nuclear program. Those are not the same transaction. Bessent's response was telling. He did not dismiss the threat. He told reporters that a currency swap line most likely would not be necessary, but that the United States would be willing to assist the UAE. That is the language of a Treasury secretary who has heard a credible signal and is trying to manage it without admitting it. The White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett was more direct. He acknowledged the report and said the US would be willing to help. Neither man said, "This is outrageous." Neither man said the UAE would never do this. They said, "We can work something out." That is the response you give when you have been credibly threatened. Compare this to how Washington responds to most challenges to dollar dominance. With dismissal, with confidence, with assertions that there is no viable alternative. The measured, accommodating tone of both Bessent and Hassett is itself a data point. It tells you that inside the Treasury and the White House, this signal was taken seriously. Think about what this means for the ordinary American household. The petrodollar system is why the United States can run persistent budget deficits without triggering the debt crises that have hit countries like Greece or Argentina. Global demand for dollars to buy oil means there is always a buyer for American Treasury bonds. This keeps interest rates lower than they would otherwise be. Lower interest rates mean lower mortgage rates, lower car loan rates, lower credit card rates. The petrodollar system is not an abstraction. It is the invisible subsidy that makes American consumer credit affordable. If that system erodes, even partially, those interest rates rise. Not immediately, not dramatically, gradually, the way that structural arrangements always erode before they break. The fourth force is the precedent problem. Because what the UAE does in this moment, other Gulf states are watching. Saudi Arabia is watching. Qatar is watching. Kuwait is watching. These countries have all been developing yuan-based trading mechanisms in parallel with the UAE. The Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange was not built for the UAE alone. The BRIBS project, the Bank for International Settlements, multi-currency digital settlement platform that includes Saudi Arabia, the UAE, China, Hong Kong, and Thailand, was not a bilateral experiment. It is a multilateral architecture designed to facilitate exactly the kind of non-dollar commodity trade that the petrodollar system was built to prevent. The petrodollar system was never a formal treaty. There was no document that said oil must be priced in dollars forever. It was a set of incentives and relationships that made dollar-based oil pricing the rational choice for every party involved. The security guarantee was real. The American market was dominant. The dollar was stable. The yield on U.S. Treasury bonds was attractive. All of those incentives pointed in the same direction. The Iran war has disrupted the incentive structure. The security guarantee has revealed its limits. The American market is being disrupted by tariffs. The dollar is weakening, and U.S. Treasury yields are rising in ways that make holding dollar assets less obviously attractive than they were. Now, I want to take you to a historical moment that clarifies what is structurally at stake. In 1956, Britain, France, and Israel launched a military operation to seize the Suez Canal. The operation was militarily successful in its early stages, but the United States, under Eisenhower, forced a withdrawal. Eisenhower threatened to sell British Treasury bonds from the American Reserve, which would have collapsed the pound sterling. Britain had no choice. It withdrew. The Suez Crisis is remembered as the moment that revealed the end of British imperial power. But what actually happened at Suez was more specific than that. It revealed that Britain's apparent military power was inseparable from American financial support, and when that financial support was withdrawn, the military power could not sustain itself. The UAE Central Bank governor's meeting with Scott Bessent is a structurally inverted version of Suez. Instead of America threatening to sell a currency to force behavior change, a Gulf state is threatening to abandon a currency to force behavior change. The direction is reversed, but the mechanism is identical. Financial leverage applied through currency markets to change the behavior of a more powerful partner. The structural lesson of Suez was not just that Britain was weaker than it appeared. It was that the international monetary architecture, who controls what currencies, who holds whose debt, who prices what commodities in which currencies, is ultimately more powerful than the military architecture. Armies can occupy territory. Currency arrangements determine whether you can afford to keep the army there. That lesson, learned by Britain in 1956, is being relearned by the United States in 2026. Except this time, the United States is on the receiving end. Now let me walk you through the 4 things to watch, because the trajectory of this situation will tell you whether this is a negotiated management of the petrodollar system or the beginning of its structural erosion. The first thing to watch is whether the Federal Reserve approves a currency swap line for the UAE. The WSJ report noted that Fed approval is unlikely, citing precedent. The Fed maintains swap lines with major developed economy central banks, but has never established one with a Gulf state. If the Fed refuses and the Treasury finds an alternative mechanism, it signals that Washington is managing the threat without acknowledging its structural dimension. If no deal is reached, watch for the next UAE-China yuan oil transaction. The second thing to watch is Saudi Arabia. The UAE has moved first because it has the most developed yuan infrastructure and because it was the hardest hit by Iranian retaliation. But Riyadh is the linchpin of the petrodollar system. Saudi Arabia is China's largest oil supplier. China accounts for more than 20% of Saudi oil exports. The Enbridge platform includes the Saudi Central Bank. If Riyadh signals even a partial openness to yuan-priced oil contracts, the structural shift becomes irreversible. Watch for any Saudi-Chinese energy deal announcement in the coming weeks. The third thing to watch is the May Trump-Xi summit in Beijing. Trump is traveling to China at a moment when American leverage over Beijing has been partially undermined by the petrodollar signal from Abu Dhabi. If China is openly developing an alternative to the dollar-based oil trading system, and if Gulf states are signaling openness to that alternative, the American negotiating position in Beijing is materially weaker than it would be in normal times. Watch the language of any joint statement about energy, currency, and trade. What is not said will be as important as what is said. The fourth thing to watch is the dirham peg. The The UAE dirham is pegged to the US dollar at a fixed exchange rate. Maintaining that peg requires holding substantial dollar reserves and defending it through open market operations. If the UAE begins pricing significant portions of its oil in yuan, it creates a structural tension between its dollar peg and its yuan revenues. That tension can be managed for a while. It cannot be managed indefinitely. Watch whether any UAE official raises, even implicitly, the question of the dirham peg's long-term viability. That would be a signal of a magnitude that makes last week's Bessent meeting look like a preliminary conversation. The structural conclusion is this: the petrodollar system is not collapsing this week. The dollar remains the dominant global reserve currency, accounting for 58% of disclosed global foreign exchange reserves. The yuan accounts for approximately 2%. The infrastructure gap between the two systems is still enormous, even as it is narrowing. But the structural conclusion is not about the present. It is about the trajectory. The petrodollar system was built on a security guarantee that is showing cracks. It was built on relationships that are being strained. It was built on incentives that are being disrupted. And for the first time in its 50-year history, the alternative infrastructure is genuinely operational rather than theoretical. A UAE Central Bank governor does not sit across a table from the American Treasury Secretary and deliver an implicit threat against the dollar's reserve status unless he has been authorized to do so at the highest levels of Abu Dhabi's government. This was not a miscommunication. This was not an offhand remark. This was a signal, deliberate, calibrated, and backed by infrastructure that makes it credible. This is not prophecy. This is structural history combined with game theory. I might be wrong about the speed of the erosion. I might be wrong about whether Washington finds a financial solution that satisfies Abu Dhabi and stabilizes the system for another decade. If I am wrong, we will come back and analyze why. Save this analysis. Come back in 30 days. Check whether a UAE currency swap line has been established. Check whether any Saudi oil has been priced in yuan. Check whether the Enbridge project has announced any expansion. Those 3 data points will tell you whether last week's meeting in Washington was a managed crisis or the opening move in a structural transformation. Subscribe if you want to follow this as it develops, because the story of whether the petrodollar survives the Iran war is the story of whether the American economic order survives the 21st century.